It was a calm summer day. Our main character stood at the crossing, carefully peering at the screen of his phone. His mother persistently tried to convince him that he should attend his brother's birthday party that evening. The traffic light turned green, meaning people could cross the road. Matt agreed to his mother's persuasion. He wrote to his friends saying that he would not be able to join them today. The guy was busy chatting with friends and did not notice the man walking towards him, as a result of which they collided. Matt apologized to the angry man, bowing his head guiltily. After that, he continued on his way, putting the phone in his pocket. Thinking about what would be suitable as a birthday present, the hero tried to remember what his brother liked. Suddenly, there was an explosion somewhere nearby. Everyone started looking around, trying to figure out what it was. Matt noticed something quickly approaching the ground from the sky, leaving behind a bright yellow trail. The hero and all the people around him watched this with frozen horror on their faces. A couple of moments later, another deafening explosion was heard. People began to get out of their cars and run as far as possible from the site of the explosion. Another meteorite hit a multi-story building. The next second, the building began to rapidly become covered with deep cracks and crumble to the ground. People fled in panic, some were overcome by numbness, and they only looked in horror as a pile of stones flew at them. Suddenly, many meteorites burst through the darkened sky. They fell to the ground one after another, leaving behind terrible destruction throughout the city. Matt, along with others, ran away from the deafening explosions, hoping to find a safe place and take refuge there. Suddenly, he heard the cry of an unfamiliar girl who was running out of the subway and with tears in her eyes calling for help. The hero shouted at her to run in his direction. Suddenly, an ambulance appeared on the road, the driver of which tried to get as far away from this place as possible, knocking down a girl standing in his way. Matt was shocked by what he saw and ran forward, not distinguishing the road in front of him. He did not understand what was happening and sincerely hoped that everything that was happening was just a terrible dream. The hero returned to reality when he heard the signal sound of a truck that was rapidly approaching the guy. He was already prepared for the fact that he was about to be knocked down and instinctively covered his head with his hands. When no pain followed a few seconds later, Matt opened his eyes. Suddenly, he felt his entire world begin to distort, after which the hero lost consciousness. After some time, the hero woke up. The scene of the truck rushing towards him was still in front of his eyes. The guy didn't understand why he was still alive if the truck was going to hit him. Suddenly, he was attracted by strange sounds, forcing him to return to reality. When Matt looked up, he was very surprised. Griffins flew high in the sky, emitting loud cries, and two moons hung above them. The hero did not understand what was happening and where he was. Suddenly, a strange sound nearby was repeated, causing the guy lying on the ground to flinch. Rising from the ground, the guy directed his gaze in the direction from which he had heard a strange sound earlier. A few moments later, the sound was repeated once again, but much closer, after which the silhouette of a large animal appeared from the shadows of the trees. The angry bear growled, trying to fight off his attackers. Matt watched in horror as the huge body gradually approached him. He saw many wolves jump at the bear, digging into him with their sharp fangs. This incident was remembered for a long time by the hero, who had just found himself in a world unfamiliar to him. The doctor's voice made the hero look away from his memories and return to reality. The man wrote down everything that the guy told him, and from time to time asked clarifying questions. Matt answered all his questions, telling him what happened to him. The man couldn't help but ask the question that interested him about how Matt managed to get back. The hero looked up at the doctor and silently studied the man sitting in front of him for several moments before giving an answer. That day, two more wolves rushed at the bear from behind, biting into the animal's neck. For a few moments, the bear fell on its side. After this, the members of the wolf pack who were on the side ran towards the defeated prey. Approaching the bear, the wolves began to eat him, gnawing their teeth into his flesh. All this time, Matt watched the wolves, hiding behind the stones, hoping that he would not be discovered. However, contrary to his expectations, the little wolf cub managed to smell him and approached the hero from behind. The beast looked at Matt with interest. The guy was gripped by fear. He was afraid that if other wolves came here now, he would not survive. Matt ran as far away from that place as possible, so as not to become the next victim of predators. Sometime later, the sky began to take on the color of the dawn sun. Our hero ran all this time without stopping. Although his strength was already running out, he was afraid that if he stopped, the wild animals would catch up with him and tear him to shreds. Suddenly, an unknown voice informed Matt that his stamina had risen to a higher level. At that moment, the guy tripped over a stone. He failed to keep his balance and rolled down the mountain. A couple of moments later, the hero landed in the bushes. Suddenly, he heard strange sounds somewhere to the side that alarmed him. When the guy stood up and looked in front of him, he was very surprised. Near him lay something that looked like fruit. Unknown to Matt, the fruit looked like tomatoes and was of impressive size. At that moment, the guy's stomach began to growl, and he realized that he was hungry. While wondering if it was edible, Matt noticed ants swarming around one of the fruits, eating it. The hero watched this for several minutes to make sure that nothing would happen to the ants and that he could eat these fruits. Sometime later, Matt was actively eating juicy fruits, satisfying his hunger. The guy froze when he heard a strange sound. The tall grass began to rustle. Matt sensed that someone was hiding there. Suddenly, he met the gaze of someone's amber eyes with elongated pupils. The hero was seized with horror. Sensing his fear, a huge snake emerged from the grass, towering over the guy. Numb, Matt could not move to attempt an escape from the threat hanging over him. Suddenly, a huge frog jumped out of the bushes and sank its teeth into the body of the snake. After that, she disappeared in an unknown direction, taking the prey with her. After this scene, horror gave way to great surprise. Matt realized that the place he had ended up in by chance was very strange. The next moment, the hero lost consciousness. 3 months have passed since our hero appeared in this world. During this time, Matt adapted here and learned to survive. To protect himself, the guy spent almost all his time in the trees. This way, he didn't have to worry about being attacked while he was sleeping. However, the wolves constantly pursued him wherever he moved. The hero never managed to figure out how to get rid of this chase. But wolves were not the only danger in this forest, and he needed to be constantly on guard, paying attention to even the smallest rustles. A whole year passed in this way. While searching for food, he accidentally came across hanging bunches of gigantic bananas. It was with them that the guy decided to satisfy his hunger. When he managed to tear off one of the bananas, a familiar system window appeared in front of him, which notified him that his strength had increased by 1. Afterwards, he sat down on one of the tree branches, placing the extracted fruit in front of him. Matt tore the thin skin with his hands and began to eat. All this time, the wolf cub persistently followed our hero. Matt managed to get used to him and even began to miss him when the wolf cub was not around. Suddenly, the guy felt something dripping onto his back. He looked up to see what it was. The next moment, his face frowned. What he saw did not bode well. On a branch just above, there was a huge gorilla. When the guy noticed her, she let out a terrible roar and jumped down. Matt had to be rescued immediately. A moment later, the gorilla landed on the branch on which our hero had previously been sitting. Having jumped, the guy grabbed the vine and hung on it, but the branch could not withstand the weight of the animal and broke. The next second, the gorilla flew down. The wolf cub was right under the broken branch, and a huge carcass was flying straight at him. A couple of moments later, the gorilla landed on its back with a huge crash. The wolf cub flew several meters to the side. Hearing the whining of the wolf cub, the gorilla paid attention to him. A sliver of a fallen branch bit into the animal's hind leg, causing blood to flow from the wound. But despite this, the wolf cub stood up and began to growl at the gorilla, who was several times larger than himself. In response, the gorilla also began to growl. The next moment, she rushed at the wolf cub with a terrible scream. When the gorilla punched next to the wolf cub, he was thrown aside again by the shockwave. Matt couldn't let the wolf cub he'd become attached to do this. Jumping onto the gorilla's neck, the guy stuck a sharp branch into its eye. The animal screamed in pain. The gorilla reached behind its head with its paws, grabbing the guy. A second later, she threw him off of her, throwing him to the side. The hero crashed into a tree, hitting his back painfully, and the wolf cub rushed to run as far as possible from a strong enemy. The animal was furious and rushed at the guy, punching tree trunks that came in the way with its fists. Matt sat leaning against a tree and could not move. He realized that it was very stupid of him to go against such a powerful opponent with his bare hands. When the guy fell silent for a moment, stopping his story, Dr. Nicholas asked why he then acted in such a rash way. Without raising his tired gaze to the man, Matt replied that he could no longer run away from turf battles. The man listened to the guy's story with excitement without interrupting. After a pause, Matt continued, saying that wherever he went, there was always a ruler. Seeing the speed with which the gorilla was rushing towards him, the hero had already come to terms with his death. Approaching him, she raised her fists above her head, intending to hit Matt with them. But suddenly, a white wolf attacked her. The hero did not expect that someone would come to his aid and was very surprised. A couple of moments later, a whole pack of wolves attacked the gorilla, gnawing their teeth into the body of their enemy. The guy's consciousness began to slowly leave our hero. Then he really thought that this would be the end of him. While he was unconscious, the wolves did not touch him. Most likely, they thought that he had saved the wolf cub. As it turned out later, this wolf cub was the son of the leader of the pack. A month has passed since that incident. The flock often changed their hunting location, so they moved at night, when almost all the inhabitants of the forest were asleep. Matt joined their pack and tried to run along with the wolves. When he got tired and could no longer continue on his way, Bai, as he called the wolf cub, stopped and waited for him, after which they together caught up with the others. Sometimes the wolf cub also became exhausted from continuous running. On such days, the guy took him in his arms and ran with him, giving the puppy a rest. After several months, Matt managed to get used to this rhythm of life, and he and the now grown-up Bai ran on par with other adult wolves from the pack. Thus, 2 years flew by unnoticed by the guy. The guy adopted the pack's lifestyle during this time, and the wolves accepted him as part of their pack. After 20 years of living in this forest, Matt has hardly changed at all, but he was able to become much stronger. He hunted with the pack, attacking dangerous predators. Over all these years, he was never able to get out of this forest, so he decided to stay in the pack. Also exploring this forest, the hero could not find traces of any civilization. He began to participate in the fight for territory in order to help the pack survive. Most often, Matt attacked enemies from above, moving with the help of vines. Today, too, the hero was waiting for the right moment to attack a boar that the wolves were driving into a trap. Sensing the right time, the guy jumped down, stabbing the animal's head with a sharp stick. After another 120 years, Matt came to the conclusion that he was the only person on this planet. In endless battles, he gained many new friends in the form of wolves, but also lost many. After a few more centuries, he had already begun to lose count of how many hundreds of years had passed since his appearance in this world. Matt did not understand how he managed to stay alive and practically unchanged all this time. When the guy fell silent, the doctor asked the question that most interested him, how Matt managed to come back. That day, another clash between wolves and gorillas occurred. Wolves fearlessly rushed towards their enemies to defend their territories. The gorillas also rushed towards the pack of wolves with a wild roar. A couple of moments later, on the mountain, a fierce battle began. The wolves jumped on the massive bodies of the gorillas, tearing their flesh with their fangs, and they in turn fought them off with their powerful fists. Matt was there too, fighting alongside his pack. Pulling out a homemade sword from behind his back, the guy rushed at the gorilla, raising the weapon above his head. At that moment, a sudden flash appeared that blinded everyone around for a couple of seconds. Matt felt the space around him begin to distort. He and the gorilla began to be sucked into a funnel. After that, a large ball of light appeared in this place, which again blinded everyone. Thus, Matt disappeared from that world. At the same time, in his world, a group of awakened people, consisting of 3 people, explored one of the destroyed areas. Suddenly, Alice stopped, informing her partners that they were there. Suddenly, the device handed to her began to make strange sounds. The girl turned around, informing the captain that the spatial energy here was simply off-scale. Klaus ordered them to immediately send their coordinates to the portal control team. Elisa and Stas immediately followed the order of their commander, taking out their mobile phones. Suddenly, a bright flash appeared that blinded them. Klaus shouted that a portal was opening and they should be as careful as possible. They all turned around and ran, trying to get as far away from the portal as possible. None of them could even imagine who might appear from there. A couple of moments later, a strong roar was heard behind them. A strong gust of wind knocked their entire team off their feet. Klaus said in horror that the portal had opened. Stas began to crawl back, saying that he did not want to die. Alice stood up and grabbed her sword. She had no intention of running away. The girl shouted for her partners to run away while she bought them some time by fighting the monster. Klaus contacted his superiors, requesting assistance. A couple of moments later, the portal began to turn red, increasing in size. Alice prepared to attack the enemy. Gradually, the girl began to distinguish an unfamiliar silhouette, which vaguely resembled a human one. After a couple of seconds passed, her eyes widened in surprise. A man came out of the portal. She had never heard of this before. Everyone knows that only monsters always come out of there. At some point, she realized that her body was trembling with fear. Suddenly, the guy made a terrifying sound like the roar of an animal. Alice was surprised that a person was capable of something like that. Electric lightning bolts suddenly began to appear around the portal. Frightening energy emanated from the guy himself. However, instead of attacking the girl, his body suddenly began to fall on its side. Alice watched in surprise as the stranger collapsed exhaustedly to the ground, losing consciousness. She stood motionless for several seconds, expecting the guy to get up and attack, but this did not happen. Klaus and Stas seemed equally surprised by what had just happened. The girl tried to understand where this guy got such strength from. She didn't feel such pressure even in dungeons with high-level monsters. Alice looked closely at the unconscious Matt's face. She wondered who he was. When the guy finished his story, Dr. Nicholas turned off the recording device. The man thanked him for such an interesting story. He said that he would transfer all the testimony and examination results to the Bureau of the Awakened, and also said that Matt should be discharged from the hospital very soon. When the man was about to leave the room, the hero suddenly spoke. Dr. Nicholas turned around in surprise, looking at the guy. Raising his head, Matt thanked the man for listening to him, because for the first time in 1,000 years he was able to talk to someone. Smiling, the man replied that he should thank him for sharing a very valuable story with him. Walking along the hospital corridor, Nicholas thought that he had come across a very interesting patient. On the same day, as he said earlier, he transferred all the information received to the Bureau of the Awakened. Alice was in the director's office, turning a small card in her hands. She doubtfully asked if the information here was correct. The man sitting in his chair asked what was bothering her. She was surprised that Matt's ID card stated that he was an F rank. David replied that he was a rare case, having high physical characteristics at such a low level. If he had an E rank, he could receive disability benefits from the state. Alice was haunted by something else. She was well aware that the F rank meant that Matt was a completely ordinary person. But an ordinary person would not be able to pass through the portal, which is why she asked if everything was indicated correctly. The man took the tablet, looking over the guy's results again. He assumed that Matt might just have been lucky. He might have been hiding somewhere and accidentally stumbled upon the return stone. Then he handed the girl a tablet with updated results from the doctor, which he had just received. After reading the doctor's report, Alice learned that the guy has post-traumatic stress disorder, which is often found among returning people F class. Because of this, Matt confuses imagination with reality. Below, the girl noticed a note that at times he behaves like a wolf. This caused her great surprise. But the next moment, the image of Matt surfaced in her memory when he first appeared from the portal. Then he growled like an animal. Afterwards, the girl took a package of documents from the director's desk and clarified whether these documents were intended for Matt. The man nodded, saying that even though he was F rank, but according to the management, they should treat the guy as a returnee. Alice asked permission to deliver these documents to him personally. David looked at her in surprise and asked with sincere bewilderment why she needed this. Turning around, she replied that she had to verify everything for herself. 2 weeks have passed since Matt returned to his world. All this time he was in a solitary hospital room. Despite the fact that for a long time he dreamed of returning back, now everything seemed alien to him, and he did not understand how to live further and what to do. The nurse came in and pulled Matt out of his thoughts, informing him that she had brought him lunch. A couple of moments later, a tray with aromatic food appeared in front of him. At the sight of food, the hero's stomach growled, and he realized that he was really hungry. The guy carefully examined the tray, deciding where to start. At the same time, Alice arrived at the hospital and stood in front of the door. Without hesitation, the girl entered the room without knocking. The hero was too engrossed in food and did not pay any attention to the guest who entered. Alice watched in surprise as Matt ate. She noted that he really had animal habits. Feeling her gaze on him, the hero looked up from his food and looked at her displeased. The girl hastened to introduce herself, saying that she came from the Awoken Bureau. Matt slowly began to get out of bed, saying that her scent and her blonde hair seemed familiar to him. Squatting down in front of her, the guy sniffed the girl, saying that he definitely had met her somewhere before. Alice explained that she was the first person to see him come out of the portal. The girl clearly remembered that when this guy first came out of the portal, he definitely felt like a predator. But looking at him now, Alice began to think that then it was just her imagination. She waited patiently for Matt to finish eating so she could move on to more important conversation. Putting the empty tray on the table, the guy asked the girl what the Awoken Bureau was, but Alice was in no hurry to answer his question and expressed her dissatisfaction with the fact that he was talking to her too informally. Matt argued that he was 1,000 years older than her. After his words, the girl sighed, remembering his diagnosis. She handed him the documents, explaining that the Bureau of the Awakened is a government organization that helps returnees like him adapt to society, then pointed to the handed documents, saying that he should study them. She then asked Matt to sign and agree to the release of his personal information. The guy was surprised to pick up the ballpoint pen handed to him. He started sniffing her, saying that he hadn't seen things like this in ages. When Matt started drawing on the documents instead of signing them, Alice stopped him, reminding him that he just needed to sign. Looking at him, the girl came to the conclusion that he was a complete idiot. A few moments later, irritation began to wash over her with renewed vigor. Matt started drawing important documents again. She asked if he learned to draw in that world. The hero replied that he had been fond of drawing since childhood. Hearing this, Alice irritably asked if he had learned anything in that world. Contrary to all her expectations, Matt gave a negative answer, saying that he had been living in the forest all that time, trying to survive. But the girl interrupted him, saying that he had just been running all these 10 years. In order to become a true returner, he needs to kill monsters and take away their spatial energy. But looking at him, Alice came to the conclusion that he was really just lucky to accidentally stumble upon the return stone. Matt objected, saying that he spent not 10 years, but 1,000 years in that forest. The girl closed her eyes and said irritably that he had only spent 10 years there, not 1,000. The hero looked at the girl with confusion. She pointed him to the notes in the documents, where it was written that the guy had disappeared 10 years ago. Matt began to carefully read the text, looking for confirmation of the girl's words. He could not believe that only 10 years had passed. Alice, at that time, handed him his awakened identity card. The guy put the documents aside and picked up the card, examining it. Afterwards, the girl stood up and headed towards the door, reminding Matt to carefully study all the documents. Having said this, Alice said goodbye to him and left the room. Matt looked at the closed door for a couple of seconds after that. Remembering the documents left to him, the hero began to look for information about his family. He prayed that they would be alive. While in that forest, over time he gave up, because he understood that if he returned back, he would no longer be able to find his family or his friends. However, upon returning back, he had to come to terms with the fact that he had lost his newfound family, with whom he had spent all these 1,000 years together. Now he is told that only 10 years have passed, which means his family may still be alive. A couple of minutes later, Matt came across the information he needed. From what he read, he learned that his father and mother were already dead. It was painful for him to accept this fact. He began to look for mentions of his younger brother, hoping that at least he survived. The next moment, he accidentally caught his eye on a couple of lines below, and his heart skipped a beat. A couple of minutes later, he was racing down the hospital hallway, screaming that he needed to see Dr. Nicholas. At the end of the corridor, he saw a door with the name he needed and grabbed the doorknob, ignoring all the protests of the nurses. The next moment, he burst into the man's office. Nicholas, sitting in the chair, was surprised by such an unexpected guest. Smiling, he asked the guy why he was here. Matt replied that he needed help. Nicholas asked what kind of help he needed. The hero approached the man's desk, saying that his little brother was still alive and he needed to find him, so he asked to be discharged from here immediately. Dr. Nicholas replied that the guy was not yet ready to go out into society and suggested that he wait until his brother came here himself. After his words, Matt's gaze changed. He said that he had not come here for someone's permission. The guy's words amused the man, and he agreed to help him. But Nicholas said he had one important condition. Matt asked what it would be. A few hours later, our hero was discharged from the hospital, and he was already sitting in the car. He thanked the doctor for the help he received. The man just smiled, saying that they would definitely see each other again. Then he told the taxi driver that the guy had not yet fully recovered and asked him to make sure that Matt arrived safe and sound. After that, the car started moving. The nurse standing behind Nicholas asked why he paid all of this guy's hospital bills and even gave him clothes and called a taxi. She really didn't understand the reason for his action, because usually even the awakened bureau leaves those who returned with an F rank on the sidelines. The man just smiled. He replied that he just wanted to know the rest of his story. Mina was surprised that Nicholas was actually interested in the guy's crazy stories. Returning to his office, he asked that the doorknob in his office be replaced as quickly as possible. After his words, the girl looked at the handle in surprise. It was difficult for her to imagine what kind of strength a person must have to leave such strong dents. She remembered that the only one who could do this was Matt, who had burst in here a few hours earlier. Nicholas relaxed into his chair. He noticed that his doorknob was breaking for the second time. The man had not encountered something like this for a long time. At the same time, Matt and the driver were stuck in a traffic jam. The news was broadcasting urgent news that a new portal had appeared, from which many monsters appeared and overflowed the unprotected field. Thanks to the live broadcast, the attacking monsters could be seen. To solve the current problem, the Ministry of National Defense sent the Army and Air Forces. Most of the monsters were destroyed within 50 minutes, but the military forces suffered multiple casualties. The reporter reported that 2 tanks were disabled, and a total of 12 military and awoken were killed. After that, the news switched to a match between the world's S-rank superheroes, which would take place any minute between number 34 on the leaderboard, Mikhail, and number 48, Greg. The winner of the match will get the opportunity to fight the Japanese fighter, ranked number 1 on the world leaderboard. Matt listened with interest. He remembered Dr. Nicholas's words that the world had changed a lot since monsters began to appear. In his thoughts, the hero did not notice how the ongoing show was replaced by another advertisement. It was reported there that the Storm Guild, which was the 4th most powerful in the country, was looking for new faces. Looking down at the screen, Paul said that if he were awakened, he would happily quit his job as a driver and become a hunter, joining the guild. Matt asked if there was any land for monster hunting in their city. The man glanced sideways at him, suggesting that the guy had hit his head hard earlier. The driver began the story from the moment when 10 years ago, gates to another world opened all over the world. Later this day was called the Day of the Great Catastrophe. On that day, the first spatial collision occurred. Their world connected with many others, which is why monsters began to appear everywhere. In the battle with them, humanity lost 10% of its population. The military could not stop the continuously appearing monsters. When the military suffered another defeat, mercenaries intervened. The awakened ones were given mercenary licenses, which allow them to hunt monsters freely. Gradually, they began to create their own guilds and earn money by clearing fields and dungeons. Matt asked with interest how they managed to get a mercenary license. The man laughed and replied that this is difficult for an ordinary person to achieve. He explained that first the guy needs to be awakened, and then pass the exam at the Bureau of the Awakened. Listening to Paul, Matt realized that the process of becoming a mercenary is quite difficult. Sometime later, they approached a residential area located closer to the outskirts of the city. The car stopped. The man said that they were there, after which he pointed to a 2-story house, saying that he needed to go there. Matt thanked the driver and got out of the car. After that, he slowly moved towards the house indicated to him by the driver. Looking for an entrance inside, he walked around the house on the other side. A woman who was cleaning a window on the second floor heard footsteps and looked down. Seeing an unfamiliar young man under the window, she asked what he was doing here. Matt replied that he had come to see Ray. For several seconds, the woman carefully studied the guy standing below. The hero patiently waited for some answer from her. Suddenly, the woman spoke up, expressing dissatisfaction with the fact that he interacted with elders without an ounce of respect. Matt stood there without answering her remark. The next moment, the woman shouted that there was no Ray here and he should leave here. After that, she closed the unwashed window, making it clear to the guy that she did not intend to talk to him further. Confused, he asked himself if the driver had made the wrong address. Suddenly, he heard loud voices from the second floor, and after listening, Matt recognized the voice of that woman. She complained that creditors did not stop pestering them. The hero was interested in this conversation and was in no hurry to leave. Approaching the door of the house, he heard another voice which belonged to a child. With every step taken, the voices became clearer and clearer. Stopping at the front door, Matt noticed the many untouched letters with which the mailbox was already overflowing. He took one of them. The guy simply studied the information written on the envelope for several moments. He was surprised that his brother was deeply in debt. Matt turned and walked away from Ray's house. He thought that in the world where he was before, strength was one of the most important factors. The strongest were feared and respected. But in this world, everything was structured much stronger. The hero began to realize that in a civilized society, it is impossible to solve absolutely everything by physical force. He came to the conclusion that the real power here was money. The next day, Matt headed to the Awoken Bureau. Approaching the registration desk, he handed over his ID and application to take part in the exam. Moments later, the girl to whom he presented his ID informed him that his application for the exam had been rejected because he did not meet all the requirements. Matt did not understand how this was possible because he was an awakened F rank. The girl replied that he lacked the awakened glasses. The guy said that this is impossible because he appeared here 2 weeks ago, passing through the portal. The girl sighed and explained that ordinary people would not be able to pass through the portal because their bodies would simply be torn to pieces. Matt replied that he definitely came from the portal, but the girl interrupted him, saying that he should leave his empty fantasies at home. Raising her head, the girl said that he could go to the School of the Awakened or work in the field for points. After that, he left the room, coming to the conclusion that everything here was very complicated. Suddenly, he noticed a sign in front of him, from which he learned that there was a reward for killing the goblins that appeared on the field, $500 each. He stood in front of the sign for several minutes, studying the information on it. Matt called a taxi and went to the field. When they approached the desired place, the hero saw a large wall enclosing the entire area. When the guy asked about it, the driver replied that they were located throughout the city. The driver said that the city is divided into 12 districts. There are hundreds of gates inside the city that allow you to move between worlds. There are also many external gates that lead to the fields. Their location can be seen in the Maps application. After listening to the driver, Matt thought that he needed to buy a phone. A couple of minutes later, the car stopped and the driver reported that they were there. After thanking the driver, the guy got out and saw in front of him a tunnel in the wall through which he could get to the field. Matt stood in thought for a couple of seconds, but then took a decisive step towards the tunnel. As he approached, he saw 2 men in uniform guarding the entrance. One of them asked Matt what brought him here. He replied that he came here to hunt. The man scanned the guy with his eyes for a couple of seconds. Then he asked him to show his hunter's license. Matt replied that he didn't have one. After his words, another man intervened, saying that civilians were strictly prohibited from entering the field. Suddenly, loud noises were heard from the entrance. Other guards came running at the noise. A couple of moments later, a truck drove out of the tunnel at high speed. The monster got inside the truck and attacked the driver. The man lost control, causing the car to skid to one side, and the next moment, it crashed into a concrete barrier. The guards radioed another squad, calling for reinforcements. They then surrounded the truck, aiming their guns at it. A couple of seconds later, the monster's bloody paw appeared through the broken glass of the truck, after which he got out of there completely. Glenn ordered the shelling to begin. The guards obeyed his order, and the next moment many bullets flew at the monster. As the bullets pierced his body, he began to scream in pain. A couple of minutes later, Glenn signaled for everyone to stop firing. After that, they approached the truck on which the dead body of the monster lay. The man contacted the other group, informing them that the monster had been killed and no reinforcements were needed. Tyler approached and asked where the guy who had earlier arrived here in a taxi had gone. Glenn turned around, looking for the guy with his eyes. But without finding anyone, he assumed that he left as soon as the monster appeared here. At the same time, Matt was on the field. He walked forward slowly. He was familiar with the sensations he experienced in this place. The hero felt something similar while in the forest. Looking at the destroyed area, it was hard for him to believe that almost all cities had turned into something similar. The hero stood in one place, watching the setting sun. A couple of hours later, night fell. Matt was still standing in the same place. He felt much calmer at night. The shadow of the night could hide his presence from others and make him more invisible. He took a step into the abyss. The guy thought that the time had finally come for his hunt. He flew down from a destroyed multi-story building without a drop of fear. A couple of moments later, Matt landed on his feet. The hero felt that his body had become a little heavier than before when he lived in the forest. Raising his head, he looked around. Then he rose to his feet and ran forward as fast as he could. He covered a long distance in a matter of seconds. Running up to the building in front, Matt jumped several tens of meters up. Pushing off from the wall of the house, he was able to find himself a couple of meters higher. Seizing the right moment, the guy grabbed the collapsed roof of the house. A couple of moments later, Matt climbed onto it. He noticed that he was significantly weakened after returning to his world. He found himself at the highest point, from where it would be most convenient for him to determine the location of the monsters. The guy began to sniff, trying to catch the smell of monsters. Suddenly, he felt something and turned his head to the side. Looking down, Matt decided to start his hunt from there. He walked down, stopping at a small building that looked like a store. Matt heard quiet sounds coming from behind this building. The hero moved forward decisively. In a dark alley, there was a wounded dog surrounded by many armed goblins. One of them let out a terrible growl, preparing to pounce on its victim. The dog bared his teeth, taking a step back. At the same moment, Matt appeared from the darkness. The dog tensed even more, preparing to sink his teeth into the neck of his enemies. The whole crowd of goblins rushed at the animal. The guy grinned. He couldn't let his spoils go to someone else. Approaching the goblins from behind, Matt hit one of them on the head. The monster didn't have time to do anything when his head was broken in with one blow. The next moment, a system window appeared in front of the hero. The system tried to determine the guy's class, but a window constantly popped up warning about an unknown system error. He waved his hand at the numerous windows to make them disappear. The goblins turned their attention to our hero, and now they were all attacking him together. Matt attacked one of them, who was dangerously close to him. Afterwards, in a couple of blows, he dealt with the other monsters that attacked him. Seeing how quickly Matt dealt with his kin, one of the goblins took the opportunity and escaped by jumping onto a tall building. Hearing a strange sound next to him, he looked around. At the same moment, Matt's hand grabbed the goblin by the monster's head. He threw the goblin down. He fell to his death from such a height. A couple of seconds later, our hero landed next to him. Immediately after this, a system window appeared in front of him again, which informed Matt that he had been assigned the Druid class. When the system tried to give him new abilities, an error message appeared again. Looking at this, the hero remembered something. When he first appeared in another world, he began to receive messages about raising his level. But when his body reached the highest level, he stopped receiving messages. Matt assumed that his abilities here were weakened due to this system error. Suddenly, a system window appeared, which informed the guy about open access to the store. Our hero had never seen anything like this before, so he was very surprised. He clicked on the store name that popped up to find out what was there. Immediately after this, a window opened in front of him, which showed how many points Matt had, which are awarded for killing monsters, as well as the goods in the store, although so far it was only water and a bun. The guy was a little upset by such a modest assortment. Out of interest, he bought the water and bun offered to him, and was surprised when the items he bought immediately appeared in front of him. Suddenly, the hero heard a plaintive whine that came a little further away. Turning around, he saw an exhausted, wounded dog, next to whom was a small puppy. Matt walked over and knelt down next to them. After examining the dog, he realized that he was dying. He began to whine pitifully, and his eyes began to slowly close. The guy was surprised when the dog asked him to look after his cub. Matt said he didn't come here to become someone's nanny, and tried his best to keep the dog from losing consciousness. But he had already closed his eyes and did not react to anything else. The hero sighed sadly, suggesting that such an outcome was destined for him by fate from the very beginning. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. Matt took out a bun and handed it to the puppy. While the puppy was eating a bun, the hero stood up and walked over to the scattered corpses of the goblins. Having counted 7 bodies, he thought that the machine would be very useful to him. A few hours later, dawn came. Matt was sleeping under a tree, holding a snoring Oliver in his arms. A little earlier, he had buried the puppy's dead parent next to this tree. After petting Oliver, the guy said that it was time for them to go. At the same time, the military carefully checked everyone who was planning to leave the field. One of the men was unhappy that the check was very slow. At some point, all the car drivers began to climb out of the windows with enthusiastic exclamations, turning back. The guard also turned around and looked in surprise in the direction where many glances had already been directed. Matt walked carrying the defeated, bound monsters on his back. Everyone was surprised that he could handle so much alone. Tyler recognized him as the guy who approached them yesterday. Sometime later, our hero was already in the bureau. The girl calculated the reward and said that for the monsters the guy killed and the heliotrope he managed to get, he would receive 2 million won. Matt asked what heliotrope was. The girl showed a red stone and said that they are extracted from the hearts of some goblins. Their cost depends on their size and the energy they store. Matt did not yet have a bank account, so the girl gave the entire amount in cash. Taking the bills in his hands, the hero thought that if he hunts often, then there should be no problems with earning money. At the same time, Ray stopped by his favorite store after a business trip. He was on good terms with the owner, and he was aware of the guy's plight. Ray admitted that although the work in the fields was hard, the salary was good, which would allow him to cover all debts over time. The man was happy for him and handed the guy chocolate, which Ray's son liked last time. After saying goodbye to the store owner, he went outside to his car. He was glad that he would finally return home after long days of absence. The yellow taxi car followed Ray's route, passing the same store. Sometime later, Ray stopped and parked in front of the house. Taking the shopping bag, he headed into the house, humming a cheerful tune. Suddenly, someone called out to him and Ray turned around. The next moment, he fell to the ground from a strong blow. The man who attacked him said that he was already afraid that Ray had left his child and ran away without paying his debts. The guy did not expect that collectors would be waiting for him at his house. As Ray sat on his knees in front of Thomas, he noticed that the guy began to look better during his absence. Hitting him on the shoulder with a baton, Thomas asked if he had any idea how many times they had to come here. Ray replied that he started working, so he did not return home. Then he handed over the bills, saying that this was all he had managed to earn. Thomas took the money and began to count. A couple of seconds later, he said that this money was too little. Thomas, with tears in his eyes, asked to be given a few more days during which he could return the entire amount. The collector hit the guy on the shoulder again, asking if he knew how much interest he would earn after a few more days of waiting. When Ray replied that he understood everything, Thomas said that if next time he does not get all his money, then the guy should immediately prepare his own grave. Suddenly, someone called out to them. A man unknown to Thomas appeared from around the corner, with a puppy running next to him. He wondered why someone decided to interfere in their showdown. The face of the man approaching them seemed painfully familiar to Ray. When Matt was a few meters away, Ray recognized him as his missing older brother. Thomas was surprised when he learned that Ray had a brother. Our hero decisively approached their company. Ignoring the debt collectors, Matt knelt down next to Ray. Then, smiling, he said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Ray could only look at his brother with wide eyes in surprise. When he was still at school, he was often bullied by his classmates. After beating him thoroughly, his classmates began to extort money from Ray. One day, during another beating, he heard that someone was approaching and hoped to ask for help. A couple of moments later, his older brother came around the corner with 2 garbage bags. Ray screamed, asking his brother for help. But Matt ignored all his screams, pretending that no one was there. Having thrown out the trash, he turned around and headed back to class with his head down. No matter how Ray begged him or said anything, Matt simply passed by. That day, he hoped to the last that his brother would turn around and come to his aid. But he only saw his retreating back. A few days later, the news announced that an explosion had occurred in the city center. Also from the news, Ray learned that strange red domes began to appear throughout the city, through which monsters appeared. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, distracting the boy from the TV. He immediately got up from the sofa and rushed to the entrance door. Ray hoped that his parents had finally returned home. But when he opened the door, he saw his aunt with her husband. The boy asked what they were doing here. The woman replied that they could not reach his parents, and her husband said that they urgently needed to leave here. It was at this moment that a strong explosion occurred, and the shockwave threw Ray aside. Monsters appeared and attacked his house. When Ray got up from the floor, he saw a monster's eye looking at him through the destroyed wall. But the next moment he disappeared as quickly as he appeared. That day he thought that even if his brother disappeared from the face of the earth, he would absolutely not care. That's exactly how Ray thought about his brother all these years. Examining his younger brother's face, Matt noticed that he had aged during his absence. Ray admitted that he thought that Matt had died a long time ago. Watching the touching family reunion, Thomas decided to make his presence known. Turning to Ray, he asked how the boy sitting in front of him could be his older brother. At that moment, Matt grabbed Thomas by the head, causing him bewilderment with his actions. After that, the guy threw the collector aside. Ray watched in surprise what happened. Thomas flew back several meters. Having broken through the door of someone else's house with his body, he lost consciousness. His friends could not believe that Thomas was knocked out with just one blow. Matt turned his attention to his brother, asking if he was okay. Bob rushed at the hero, obsessed with the desire to avenge his friend. He swung his foot at Matt's head, asking if he was tired of living. But our hero did not even shy away from this attack. Touching the guy's head, Bob's leg made the characteristic sound of a breaking bone. The next moment, with painful kicks, Bob, unable to maintain his balance, fell to the ground. Frightened, Ray jumped to his feet and looked in surprise at the guy crumpled on the ground. Robin, standing next to him, looked at his friend with fear. A guess appeared in his head that Ray's brother might be awakened. Suddenly, Matt called out to Robin and called him to him. Raising his hands in a sign of surrender, the guy said that he had no intention of attacking them and even dissuaded the two from violent actions towards Ray. The hero interrupted him by placing a bundle of money in front of him, telling Robin to take it. The guy froze in bewilderment. When Matt realized that his words had not reached Robin, he repeated his request, but more insistently. Robin took the money and knelt down and thanked Matt, who had already turned around and headed towards the house. When they returned home, it was already night outside. The woman carefully examined Matt standing in front of her. A couple of moments later, she asked Ray if he was really his brother, who happily replied that he was his missing older brother. After his words, Matt approached the woman and handed over the package, saying that he had bought beef for them. Miranda took the package from the guy's hands, looking inside. After that, she turned around and began to climb the steps, telling them to quickly enter the house. Once they were inside, Oliver approached the peacefully snoring boy with interest. Matt was surprised that his brother already had such an adult son. When he asked what happened to Dean's mom, Ray answered with sadness in his eyes that she chose a different life. Ray blamed himself for the fact that his son did not have a mother, and they lived in such conditions. Suddenly, Matt suggested that he continue the conversation by drinking a glass of something strong. Sometime later, they were sitting at the kitchen table, downing their fourth bottle of soju, Ray still having a hard time believing that his missing brother had returned, not having aged at all, in fact, had become awakened. Matt inquired about the amount of debt that his brother had to repay, and he replied that he owed 50 million won. Smiling, Ray said that Matt shouldn't worry about it, because now he had a job and he could get everything back. The hero asked where his younger brother got a job. He replied that he works as a loader in a small town. Because of the long distance, no one takes on such dangerous work, and that's why they pay well. Matt asked who owned the truck he saw earlier. Ray said that it belonged to Matilda's son, who lent him the truck. The hero tried to find out as much information as possible about his brother and asked what Matilda's son was doing. Ray replied that he died while transporting cargo, so she looks after Dean as if he were her own grandson. For them, this woman became a real savior. Hearing voices coming from the next room, the boy began to wake up. When he jumped up, opening his eyes, he was very surprised to find a puppy next to him. The next moment, Dean heard his father's familiar voice, and his heart beat faster with joy overwhelming him. He left his room and saw his father, whose return he had been waiting for a long time. Ray noticed his son and smiled at him happily, saying that he had returned. When the boy approached his father, he noticed that they had a guest. Ray hugged his son, saying that this was his uncle. He greeted Matt and asked permission to play with the puppy. The hero smiled and responded with a slight nod of his head. A couple of moments later, a joyful Dean was playing with Oliver. Looking at his son playing, Ray said that he had wanted a puppy for a long time. At some point, Matt invited his brother to work together. Ray asked his brother what he meant. The hero explained that he would do all the main work, and Ray would only need to help him. Ray asked interestedly what exactly their job was. Matt replied with a smile that it would be a monster hunt. His brother did not expect something like this, so he did not know how to react correctly to such a risky proposal. The next day, Matt went to the bureau again to apply for the exam. He was met by the same girl. She was very surprised when she learned that the guy managed to get official awakened status so quickly and also increase his level. Looking at his new card, Matt saw that he was now a druid with level F, and he was also informed that now the money would go directly to his card. After that, she handed the hero a box with a packed phone, saying that it was a gift from the Bureau of the Awakened. The girl said that Matt would need to download a special application, after which he would be able to receive notifications about hunting and information about new locations. She also told him that if he could catch enough monsters, he would be able to reach level E and his bonuses would increase with each new level. After that, Anna asked Matt to open a system window with his status. Serious errors were discovered in the system, but they managed to fix everything. The hero complied with the girl's request and opened the status window, where he could see his level and characteristics. Having carefully studied his characteristics, he was dissatisfied. Some indicators were too low and he needed to raise them. At the same time, Ray was fulfilling another order. Talking to his brother on the phone, he congratulated him on acquiring such an important item. He said that he would finish the last delivery and come straight to Matt. Ray asked when Matt plans to take the mercenary exam. The hero replied that first they need to pay all their debts. Ray was surprised by his brother's intentions and excitedly asked if he, having an F level, could cope with the monsters alone. But instead of answering, Matt hung up the call. Ray noticed that his brother's character had changed a lot. After the hero completed the conversation with his brother, he decided to find out the location of the field where the most would be paid for the heads of defeated monsters. Sometime later, the hero was at the entrance to the 77th field. Among the many hunters who were here, there was one team for which this day could become decisive in their future fate. Justin, sitting behind the wheel, noticed how the other teammates were trembling with fear. He decided to calm them down, reminding them that they were all awakened. I also didn't forget to mention that if they complete this mission, they will officially enter the Storm Guild as main members. Justin saw that Friedrich was not happy with the composition of their team, but did not say anything about it. The man was sure that this time they would fail again, because the trio did not even have the slightest abilities. They got here thanks to their rich parents. Having let the next hunter in, the guard called the next one in line. Matt walked up to the man without hesitation. He was asked if there was anyone else on the team with him, but the guy replied that he was alone, after which he was asked to show his awakened card. Matt complied with the guard's request and handed him his card. When the man saw that the guy was level F, he asked in a concerned tone if Matt was sure that he could handle it alone, because it was very dangerous inside. But the hero replied that everything was fine and moved towards the entrance. Matt caught the attention of Friedrich, who was waiting for his turn with his team. He saw the guy go alone into the tunnel leading to the field. The guard hesitantly asked his colleague if they could send this guy alone without any weapons. Another guard recognized the guy and said that he was the one who caught 7 goblins in another field yesterday. Justin noticed Matt too and was amazed at his confidence. The man even thought that this guy was just crazy. A minute later they were approached, and after checking their documents, they were allowed inside, wishing them good luck. At this moment, Friedrich told Justin to immediately start moving and drive at maximum speed. He was determined to catch up with the guy who entered in front of them. Justin complied with his friend's request and rushed forward, picking up speed. A couple of seconds later, Friedrich felt disappointed again. When they left the tunnel, the guy was nowhere to be found. Justin looked out the window, trying to figure out where he had gone. Friedrich's disappointment instantly gave way to interest in Matt's person. At the same time, our hero was racing with all his might. Having run an impressive distance, he decided to stop and rest. After a short run, Matt realized that his body was now in a very poor state. Having looked at his characteristics once again, he was convinced that he really should return to training. Suddenly, he was attracted by strange sounds heard somewhere nearby. After listening, Matt realized that someone was fighting with swords. He smiled widely, thinking this might be interesting. The hero decided that he would never miss the battle between the awakened ones. Focusing on the sounds, it was not difficult for Matt to find the place where they were coming from. Standing on the roof of a destroyed building, he watched what was happening below, without giving away his presence. The team of 3 awakened ones was surrounded by a whole crowd of opponents. Concluding that there wasn't going to be a serious fight, Matt lost interest in them. Another man appeared from a car that stopped nearby, wearing the same coat as the group surrounding the 3 awakened ones. His appearance attracted the attention of everyone here. Approaching them, he asked why his men were taking so long to deal with only 3 bipods. Jack grinned when Steve, whom he had been tracking for so long, recognized the man standing in front of him as the leader of the bandits, who had 400 million on his head. Matt was about to leave, but when he heard the amount that could be received, he stopped. The guy turned around, looking at Jack with interest. Steve's partners began to panic at the sight of this large man. Jack slowly approached as his men surrounded Steve and his boys. Stopping, he began to flex his fists, saying that he really was the one on whose head such an impressive sum was assigned, and if they were strong enough, they could try to grab him. Thomas asked Steve what they should do. Steve himself understood perfectly well that the 3 of them would not be able to withstand such a crowd, and asked if they would be released if they left them all their things. Jack shouted that this was not interesting and rushed straight at them. Steve shouted at the man to think more carefully about his proposal. It was at that moment that Matt appeared, breaking the glass. He landed right in front of Jack, causing the floor to crumble under his feet. The man looked with confusion at the guy who appeared in front of him. Steve and his guys froze in surprise. Raising his head, Matt looked straight at Jack. The hero asked if they really were paying $400 million for his head. Jack ignored his question, asking who this guy was. Matt replied that he was the one who needed the money. Jack's subordinates, who were watching this scene, thought that the guy was simply crazy. The appearance of Matt made Jack laugh heartily. Steve stood there, trying to figure out what was going on here. After laughing, Jack looked at the guy again, coming to the conclusion that he was definitely not from the commission. Matt stood completely calmly in front of the man. Suddenly, the aura around Jack changed, and he said that it would be good if Matt minded his own business. After this, our hero's whole body was seized by a strange numbness. He tried to move from his place, but he failed. At this moment, Steve began to worry about such a desperate boy. Jack pointed to his eyes and said that Matt had been looking at them for 5 seconds. He explained that it is for this reason that our hero cannot move now. Matt frowned, realizing he was at a disadvantage. Turning around, Jack ordered his subordinates to grab Matt. They happily rushed at the guy following the order. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, Matt struck Jack in the face with his fist. The men running towards the guy stopped, surprised by what had happened. Steve was no less surprised by the fact that Matt managed to resist Jack's ability and even stab him. Jack looked down at the guy, asking how he did it. Smiling, Matt replied that it was his special ability. At that moment, the man felt something change in this guy. Then Matt rushed at Jack, once again swinging his fist. The man again used the power of his eyes on the guy, ordering him to stop. It worked, and Matt's fist stopped a few centimeters from his opponent's face. Smiling, Jack said that the boy is not as simple as he seems at first glance. The next moment, he took out a dagger and crouched down, about to stab Matt, saying that you should never let your guard down. He didn't have time to finish when the hero's knee collided with Jack's face, breaking his nose. Matt said that a man should listen to his own words. Then he gathered all his strength into his fist, preparing to strike. Jack again tried to stop the guy in the same way. But he didn't succeed, and Matt's fist flew into his face. This blow was immediately followed by another blow to the stomach. The hero dealt blow after blow to the man, after which he threw Jack aside and he flew into the window, breaking through it with his body. Matt remained standing in his place. Smiling, he said that it was too easy. Steve and his teammates were surprised that the guy managed to take down Jack single-handedly. Having dealt with Jack, Matt turned to his subordinates. He asked if they wanted to attack him too. They just shook their heads from side to side. Someone from the crowd said that he had misunderstood everything. Matt pointed to the side to his right, telling them to all stand on that side. Turning to Steve, he asked if they had a rope. The man happily nodded his head, saying that he had it. Matt then turned his attention to Jack's subordinates and asked how much they would pay for all of them. The men shouted at the interruption that there was no reward for them and that they could only pay for Jack, who forced them to cooperate with threats. Jack was disappointed that these people betrayed him so quickly. He called them traitors who stuck around him and were dragging out their share all this time. Matt was surprised that Jack regained consciousness so quickly. His former subordinates began shouting that Jack had better shut up and that he belonged in prison. Interrupting their angry tirade, the hero asked if they needed Steve and his team, but they replied that they no longer needed these people. At this moment, Steve himself intervened in the conversation, saying that they were lying to him and that they were all the same criminals as John, and if Matt captured them all, he would receive a double reward. Hearing this, the men began to even more actively convince the guy of their innocence, hoping that they would be released. John turned to Matt, asking if government laws were restricting him. The hero turned to him, asking what he meant. John explained that here the guy is free to do what he wants. If Matt lets him go, he will treat him like a king. Matt did not listen to his nonsense and approached the bound man, knocking him out with a kick. After that, he returned his attention to the seated men. Looking at them, Matt asked if there was indeed a bounty on their heads too. Steve nodded, saying that many of them were criminals. The men sighed resignedly, realizing that they would not be able to leave. Approaching them, Matt said that there were too many of them to deliver them all at once. Steve said that they had a car, which made our hero very happy. After that, the guy wished them all good night and knocked out the criminals in a matter of seconds. Sometime later, they were all riding in Steve's car. All the criminals were tied up and loaded into the spacious trunk of the car. Taking a break from the road, Steve said that they were all very grateful to Matt for his help and asked how they could thank him. But the hero said that he did not need gratitude because he did not intend to save them from the very beginning. Thomas intervened in the conversation, saying that despite this, it was thanks to him that they were all saved. Sam, sitting next to him, supported his friend's words. Without turning his head, Matt replied that since they insisted, He had no choice but to accept their gratitude. Afterwards, he began to ask Steve various questions, wondering what his abilities were, and he answered that he had the skills of a swordsman, stalker, and scout. Matt was surprised that he had 3 skills. The man explained that he mastered reconnaissance and stalking during battles. The information that skills can be acquired during battles seemed quite useful to the hero. Steve noticed Matt's thoughtful face and found it strange that he didn't know about this kind of little thing. Lost in his thoughts, the hero remembered Jack and his eye ability. He thought that it would also not hurt him to master some special technique. Coming out of his thoughts, he silently looked out the window the rest of the way. Some time later, behind the destroyed buildings, something resembling a huge blue dome appeared ahead. They drove right up to him. Matt guessed that it might be a portal, but decided to check with Steve to see if it was really a portal. The man looked at the guy with undisguised surprise. He replied that this was the easiest portal of the first level, which was their original goal. After his words, Matt sighed sadly, saying that if he had a license, he too would be able to enter. Steve couldn't believe his ears and asked if the guy really didn't have a license. Looking out the window, Matt said that she wasn't there yet, but he was going to change that soon. Matt managed to surprise Steve several times today. When the portals began to appear, the military immediately destroyed the monsters. In order for the awakened to raise their level, they needed to find and kill increasingly powerful monsters and gain experience. To really become stronger than first-level portals are not enough. You need to at least get into a second-level portal. Steve couldn't believe that this guy hadn't even entered the first-level gate yet, but he was able to defeat Jack, who had a C level. Noticing the intense gaze on himself, Matt asked if everything was okay. Steve hesitantly asked the hero what his level was. When the man heard that Matt had an F level, he was very surprised, and their car almost slid down the high mountain back down. Suddenly, the hero turned to Steve, saying that he had a request. He looked at the guy with interest, asking what it was. At the same time, there were several military detachments at the portal who would provide assistance to the hunters in a critical situation. A blurry silhouette of a man began to appear from the portal. The next moment, Friedrich came out. The other members of his group came out immediately behind him. One of the newcomers was wounded, so they called doctors to provide urgent assistance to Emil. Friedrich was very irritated. He was angry at the fact that licenses were now being distributed to everyone. Justin tried to calm the man down, saying that beginners tend to make mistakes. No matter what Justin told him, Friedrich knew the true state of affairs, and that was what angered him. Children of rich parents simply bought monsters through brokers and simply finished them off. After that, they specially hire hunters and raise their level with them. But even in such cases, victims cannot be avoided. Justin tried to distract his friend by offering him a drink. The man rejected this offer, and heading towards the military detachment, asked why it was so noisy in the first-level zone. Approaching the equipped men, Frederick turned to the lieutenant standing next to him. He asked if something had happened here, and he was told that a gang of criminals had been captured. The lieutenant also said that among them there was one with a C level, who was the most wanted among the others. Frederick had heard of him before, and was surprised that someone had managed to capture him. Based on the lieutenant's words, he concluded that there was someone with a high level here, but he was told that it was just an ordinary guy with an F level. The man was very surprised. It was hard for him to imagine that someone with a pitiful F level could defeat such a strong opponent. When Friedrich asked if the details were known, he was told that witnesses said that the guy simply beat Jack, and that the criminal actually had a broken nose and a couple of ribs. When Friedrich heard this, the image of a guy who entered the field alone popped into his head. He asked where the man who had defeated Jack now was. As soon as the man heard that the guy had recently entered the portal, he ran back, ignoring the calls of his friend. Friedrich intended to see everything with his own eyes. He could not just let such a talented person pass by. Approaching the portal, he ran up to the man guarding the entrance. The guard looked at the worried Friedrich and asked if something had happened. He ignored his question and asked if the guy who grabbed Jack had entered the portal. At the same time, Steve and Matt found themselves inside the portal. The hero was surprised that this time he did not experience pain during the transition, and his clothes did not disappear anywhere, like last time. Steve explained that the things created in their world could not be brought through the portal, and their clothes were made from materials obtained from different portals and cost a fortune. At some point, the hero noticed something strange and turned around. After this, he saw a luminous space and asked what it was. Steve explained that this was the door to the portal. He said that the portal they entered was divided inside into another 38 subportals. Suddenly, the door shattered into many pieces that began to disappear. When Matt asked why the door was missing, Steve replied that as soon as they cleared the place, it would appear again. The hero did not understand what his partner meant and asked if they needed to kill all the monsters here. He explained that they just needed to kill the boss. Hearing this, Matt reached out, saying that he would quickly sort everything out and Steve could wait for him here. The man wanted to object to him but did not have time. The guy took off, leaving behind a dent on the ground.